Welcome to the final project where we are going to containerize a Laravel application and do a high availability deployment with an end-to-end code pipeline, with an end-to-end CI/CD with CodePipeline. Now let me walk you through this project, what we are going to do. First of all, let me talk about the Laravel deployment. We are using Laravel 7. It doesn't really matter what kind of version you're using. We are just installing the latest version and we are rolling with this one. We are going to include an auth plugin that is to register and log into our site, because I also want to use a MySQL database and Redis as a cache and session store. I want to show you why we're going to need this in real-world deployments when we have multiple Docker containers running on different hosts. Now then we are talking about the Docker images. I want to use PHP-FPM as the PHP image to process the PHP files, and Nginx as our web server. Why the PHP-FPM images? Because it's slightly faster. There is a dedicated PHP image only for PHP, and the Nginx image is extremely small therefore. You can also roll with a typical PHP Apache image, which is slightly easier to manage. I think it is better to go with the PHP FPM image because for our course, I want to choose the more complex version, and then you can always go back to the easier version where you have just one image instead of two different ones. Now for local development, I want to set up Docker Compose with this PHP FPM setup. PHP FPM again has a couple of advantages over traditional CGI-based methods such as an Apache and PHP. It is essentially better for security. You have more configuration and is much better scalable than Apache plus PHP, because with the traditional CGI-based Apache image, you are spawning an Apache process every time you are creating a request, and that just doesn't scale well. Now MySQL will run also inside our container, but we will use a volume for persisting the database. Let me talk about the configuration. We are going to use this env file, but not a lot, because our configuration comes from Docker environment variables. That is what we're going to use to initialize the correct values. We saw this in the previous lectures where we used environment variables to, well, connect to a database, and in this case we are just overriding values from the env file through the Docker environment variables. So we are not using the env file at all actually. Then for our remote setup on AWS, that becomes more interesting now. We are going to add the code to CodeCommit. Then we are pushing the locally generated Docker images to the Elastic Container Registry. Then we are creating an ECS EC2 launch type cluster with a capacity provider. Then we are creating a task definition with our Nginx and PHP FPM containers so that they can talk to each other. Then we are creating and connecting an RDS database and a Redis cluster where we store the credentials in the systems manager parameter store and encrypt them. And at the end, we are doing a full end-to-end CI/CD pipeline with CodePipeline, including unit testing. So let's get started into our lab, deploy an HA Laravel application, and create an end-to-end deployment cycle. Welcome to the practical part of our course where I'm going to install Laravel. Now, we are going for the latest Laravel version, which in my case is the version 7.x. And if you head over to the documentation and you see here latest version 7x, and you see a lot of requirements, and we are already going down to installing Laravel, and we are going to use Composer to create a project from this Laravel distribution or repository block. It doesn't really matter what it is. It is just going to be an empty Laravel project. Now, we are not going to install the Composer locally on our computer. We are going to use a Docker image to run Composer and install the Laravel project. I have a totally empty folder here, and I'm going into my Visual Studio Code. Let me bring this up here so you can follow along. All right, empty project, empty folder, everything empty. Let's start a terminal, and we are going with a docker run rm command, and we are going to bind mount the current directory into the /app directory and we are getting the composer image from Docker Hub. Let me bring up the composer image documentation here for you, quick reference, what is composer and so on. And then you see here basic usage, and you see that it will automatically run the composer command, and then you just have to provide it the kind of parameter or the kind of command that you want to run with composer. Now we are going to run exactly the same command as here, create project, preferred dist, Laravel block, and let's see what happens. Now it's going into this block directory because we said we want to start a new block, and it's going to update and download the dependencies, which are quite a bit. So if you have a look at the composer JSON file, it's going to download all these dependencies it needs. And those are quite a bit. So I'm going to pause the video now, and I'm back when the dependencies are installed. All right, our installing is finished, and you can see at the very beginning, I don't know if I can slide up that far, that it already created an env file for us, which is the configuration for Laravel. And at the end of installing all the packages, it also created an application key successfully and set this into the env file. So anything you do now with Laravel, you would need this kind of app key because it encrypts session data and other interaction data for users with this key. And that is kind of the your app key for your Laravel project. Great. So we have Laravel installed, but we cannot use it yet because there is no Docker containers that can serve this content. And that's something that we are going to do in the next lecture. In this lab, I want to start creating a Docker Compose file and create a local development environment for our Laravel. Now, in the normal case, I would just go ahead and start an Apache PHP container as we did before, but it doesn't work here. And the reason is that our Laravel needs quite a bit of dependencies. So if you have a look at the dependencies of Laravel, then you see it needs a couple of extensions, and we need to install this in our own Docker container. So in order to create our own Docker container, we would need a Docker file. And we can use this Docker file then in Docker Compose. So let's get started by creating first the Docker Compose file, new file, Docker Compose YAML file. And here we are talking about version 3. And we have services, and we have an app service here. We have a database service here, and in our app service we use what is called PHP-FPM, so that our app only works on PHP, and our web server is going to be an Nginx server, which is a reverse proxy onto our PHP-FPM container. If you don't know how this works, don't worry about it. I will explain it again. And we are going to use this in this lab because it is a little bit more complicated setup than just running a normal PHP Apache server, but it has more performance, and is also a little bit more, it is easier to secure the app container, for me at least. So then we also have a web server. Great, then we need to somehow connect and do something with this. So for our app, we are going to build our own Docker image because we need the dependencies. So we're gonna build something, and we are going to build it from the context of this directory we are in right now, and the Docker file is going to be our Docker file, which we need to create. We still need to create this. We need to capitalize this Docker file. All right, we are going to produce an image, and I'm going to call this my Laravel project, and we are going to give this container a name, app, and we are going to restart the container unless stopped. And obviously we want to directly work on our files locally. So we have to first of all give it our current directory as a /var www, because we want to change something in our current directory. So we want to have it directly reflected. And we are also providing an Apache, a PHP ini config file. And in our container that's in user local etc php conf local ini. I know it because I worked on it quite extensively, so don't worry about it, just follow along. You will see in a second where this goes to. So we are going to map a local config file to a user local etc php conf local.ini, and we still have to create this. So we are going into config and we are creating a new folder, call this PHP, and inside here we are creating a new file called local.ini. We're going to paste something there later. You will see later why, because our Docker will not have any error logs and we need to enable this. So I just saw that my auto completion made this again lowercase. Great. This is our app for now. Then the next thing is our web server. There we are also going to create a Docker file, and the only reason for this is that we are going to need it for our ECR deployments later on. So I'm going to create a Docker file also from the context of this directory, and in this case we are going to provide a Docker file Nginx, and it doesn't have a lot of content though. You will see later what it is. Image Nginx, and we are going to give the container a name, web server, and we restart unless stopped. And here we are going to offer port mapping. We are going to map port 8080 from the container to port 80 on the host. This container will have the same volumes as our previous container, and we are going to map this into var www, and we are going to also have a config file /nginx/conf / and we are going to map this into etc nginx conf into the container. Great. The only other thing is that this container depends on the app container, so this container can only be started when the app container is already running, or otherwise we might get into troubles when the Nginx tries to connect to our app container to serve PHP files and the app container is not yet running, that it fails and just stops working. Now for the database is something I will leave out for now. We are going to configure this in the next lecture. I want to get started with having a simple Docker Compose setup for our app and for our web server. Now let's get started with the Docker file. And here we are going to use an image called PHP 7.3 FPM Alpine. I'm going to use this image and this tag 7.3 FPM Alpine because Alpine is a very small Linux distribution. So the whole image, including PHP-FPM, has only around 30 megabytes. And we are going to add in all our dependencies from Laravel and a lot more, and a couple more, which we're going to need later on, into this image. So let's get started with writing our Docker file from PHP 7.3 FPM Alpine, and then we are going to set the work tier to /var www, just that in case nothing is going to happen. And then we are running APK, which is the package manager on Alpine. You maybe know apt-get on Ubuntu or Debian based systems. On Alpine it's APK update and APK add. And here we are going to add a couple of packages. First of all, we are adding a build base so we can build packages, then we are going to, I forgot this line. If you have a break line and you want to write your commands in the next line, you can add a backslash, so it's going to keep adding, like it feels like it's one line, just as an FYI. Free type def, so I have them all down. And then we also need to install some Docker specific PHP extensions. So we're gonna run Docker PHP ext install, which is a binary on the container to run specific Docker PHP extension install commands. And that would be, in our case, pdo mysql, mb string, and install gd. So that's from the gd website. And then, because we also want to configure the image in a way that it's not mounting this ini file into the directory, it is directly copying this into the directory. So we copy the ini file from our config php local ini to the correct directory. Then we have to make sure that our PHP-FPM or our code is not run with sudo or with root rights. So we add another user, and we are going to change the user to the user that we just created. And then we are copying our files with the right permissions to our var www directory. All right, the last thing that we need to do is we need to expose the port 9000. And then we can actually try and run this. So let's run docker build-t tomw Laravel project, and from here. So let's see if this compiles. Config php local ini. In the wrong directory. Yes, move this one. cd blog. All right, our image is built, and now let's take care of building Nginx. That should be a lot easier. First of all, we are going to create the Nginx folder. Inside the Nginx folder, we create a confd folder, and inside this one, we are creating a file called appconf. This is what Nginx expects from within the container as a configuration file. And here I have a template, and I will walk you through this template. So it is an Nginx configuration file that listens on port 80. So it will open up a port on 80. It will say the index.php file is going to be the index.php file that, or the index, the first file that is going to be read from Nginx is the index.php file. It is going to set the error log and the access log to these directories, and these files are actually pipes to our std out, stdr and std out. And then it's going to set the root for our the HTTP root to the public directory of our project here. So it is the public directory here. And then any file that ends with PHP is going to be rerouted to the container app on port 9000. So the idea is that Nginx is only delivering any CSS files, any static files, any pictures and so on. And any dynamic files, PHP files, are going to be rerouted and processed by the PHP container. And that is running on port 9000 here in this Docker file. So that was the first part. And the second part is to actually create this Docker file Nginx. Let's see if yes, I made the right one. So Docker file Nginx. And here we are going to import Nginx Alpine, so again a very small distribution, and we are going to copy our appconf into the right directory and also our current project into the var www directory. So there's nothing more to do than config nginx conf app.conf into the etc nginx conf app.conf directory, and we are going to copy this current directory to var www. All right, let's build this. Nginx, and the file is going to be our Dockerfile Nginx, and the scope is being the current scope. So it's going to download the Nginx Alpine image and it's going to build this, and this is built. So the next thing that we can do is docker compose up, and let's hope this is running. It is not. I still have a container from a previous example, so I'm going to remove my containers, docker system prune. Let's try again, docker compose up. It is creating the app, it is creating the web server, and FPM is running. We can see this, and it is ready to, well, handle connections. Let's give it a try. And our Laravel is serving. So now we have a Laravel, but it's kind of boring without a database. So we are going to add a database and a Redis on top. So our local development environment is kind of up and running and still running. So I'm going to end this with Control-C. And there are two things that I want to do in this lecture, actually three. Number one is I want to add a database. Number two is I want to add Redis. And number three is I want to take care of our error logging, because there is no error logging with the standard PHP-FPM image. So let's get started by adding a database. A database is, we are going to use a MySQL database. So we have a new service called DB. And this is going to use an image, MySQL 5722. And we are going to give it a container name, DB. And we are going to set specific environment variables. Environment. And before I continue, let me open the MySQL image in Docker Hub and show you the environment variables. MySQL is a Docker official image, and you can see how to use this image. And you see that it has a couple of environment variables that you can set on the first start, and it will set these based we'll set specific settings based on these environment variables. So for example, you can set the environment variable MySQL database, and it will create a new database, an empty database, when the image starts up the first time. Or you set the MySQL root password, and it will create a super user root account with this root password for you. So there are specific things you can set during the startup through these environment variables, and you can make use of them quite easily. So let's start by creating a MySQL database and the root password for your MySQL database. MySQL database is going to be Laravel, and the MySQL root password is going to be your awesome password. Great. Now, one more thing, that is persistence, data persistence. If we are stopping our container and removing our container, all the data would be gone, and we don't want this. So we add a volume, and we are adding a volume called db data in/var lib mysql, and we have to define this volume here. As a volume db data driver local. Great. Now we need to use this kind of database and root password somehow also in your app. And the way we can do this is through these environment variables. Now we can override specific environment variables when we are defining them in our app, in our container, when it's starting up. So instead of changing the env file, we could say here our host is our DB, our DB port is 3306, our database is Laravel, our username is root, and our password is this my you awesome password. But we don't want this. We want to take these environment variables and directly set them in the Docker Compose file. So I go up here to my app and I say DB host is DB and DB password is you awesome password. And then let's see if this works. And we are going to bring our container up. And you see it's going to start the database the first time, so it's going to initialize quite a bit. Great. I think our database is running. So I'm going to open a second PowerShell here. I'm going into our blog and I say docker compose exec and then the container name, which is our app container, and then we are going to run PHP artisan migrate. And then you see it can connect to the database successfully because it can run so-called migrations on the database. And these migrations are files that create something in the database. So if you go to the database migrations folder, you can see here that it has initial migrations and it's going to create a users table and it's going to create a failed jobs table. And I think that's it for now. Yeah, and so we have access to our database now. And the next thing is I want to take care of the sessions. So I want to bring in a Redis environment. And it couldn't be easier with Docker Compose. We are just going to start another Redis container. Image is Redis latest. Our container name is Redis. Great, let's have a look in our env file how this looks like. We have a session driver, which is currently file. So we are going to override this in our Docker Compose file. We say session driver is Redis. I know this from the documentation of Laravel, and our Redis host is our Redis. Redis host is Redis. And in this case, this is a configuration for Laravel to take Redis, and our Redis host is the host name of our container over here, this one, Redis. Great, let's see if this works. Go back to our Docker Compose, stop this and restart this. And let's see if this works. And where is our app? Ready to handle connections. Let's see if we can still log in. We cannot. Please make sure the PHP Redis extension is installed and enabled. It is currently not installed. We have to update our Dockerfile to, well, see that we can get our Redis extensions installed. I have this already prepared, of course, so we can run. We have to add a package called autoconf, and then we use another package manager to install Redis, and then we are going to remove our autoconf again. So in this case, we're gonna stop our containers and we're gonna run Docker Compose up --build to rebuild our containers. Our containers were rebuilt and we can have a look if this works now. Let's reload. And we are back in Laravel. But there's nothing where we use a database so far. So in the next lecture, I want to take care of integrating a service where we can register users and then log in. So if you head over to the Laravel authentication documentation, then you will find here that you can get started fast with a pre-configured Vue.js auth plugin, and it will just give you a new route to your application called /register. So the way we are doing this is we install the Laravel UI package via Composer first, and then we are going to install the UI Vue package again in a fresh Laravel application. So our Laravel application is fresh, and then you get a /register route onto your application. Now let's get started with installing Laravel UI first as a Docker Compose package. Docker run --rm-v, and then we are going to install we are going to map our current directory again into the app directory from the composer image, and then we require Laravel /UI. So this will download the Laravel UI with the composer image and the composer that is installed in the composer image. Great, the composer package is installed. So the next thing is we have to run this PHP artisan command, and we have to do this inside our app container. So we're going to docker compose exec app, and then we are in our working directory, which is /war/www, and there we are going to run PHP artisan, and then let me copy that command so that I don't make a mistake. Artisan UI view --auth. Let's run this, and it needs an npm install and npm run dev to compile the fresh scaffolding. I have npm installed on my host operating system, but I will still try to use a Docker container. So I'm going to try and use this npm js npm docker baseline image. Let me see if this works. Docker run --rm-v, and then our current folder again into the /app folder, or somewhere inside the container, and then we also give it a -v for a working directory, so we are in the -app folder. Then we are going to use this image, and then we say npm install and npm run dev. Now we cannot run this like this in Docker, so we have to make a little trick, which is /bin /bash-c, and then we are going to execute the commands in with a semicolon. So let's run this and let's see if this works. This doesn't have a latest tag, so we have to use a specific tag here, 8-alpine for example. 8-alpine, and let's see if this works now. Okay, this is finished. It took about 5 minutes to finish without much of an output first. So I already thought it's going to stop or throw me an error, but it finished, and we can run our Docker Compose. Actually, it's still running. Let's see what changed on our front end side. Localhost 8080, and we see we have new routes here, login and register. Let's register. Thomas at example.com. 123. You are logged in, and I can log out, log in again. Thomas at example.com. Yeah, this works fine. Great. We have our Laravel app Dockerized. We have PHP set up. We have our Nginx set up. We have our MySQL set up. We have our Redis set up. And this is all we wanted to do for our local development. I hope this was helpful. Let's stop our Docker Compose environment and head off to the next lecture. The next thing I want to do is I want to check in our repository into CodeCommit. So let's go to CodeCommit and create a new repository. Laravel project, for example, and create this repository where we have our credentials still in our Windows or in our host OS. So I just need this one, and then I need to initialize my current working directory as a Git directory. So I'm not cloning this directory. Instead, I'm going to add our code repository, our CodeCommit repository here as an origin for pushing it to a remote repository. So the way you do this is, first of all, you're going to initialize this project as an empty repository, and then you're going to add a remote origin. So you're going to git remote add origin and then this one. And all you have to do now is git add this one. So we're going to add all the files, git commit -m, maybe initial commit, and then we're going to push origin master. So we're going to push from our master branch to the master branch in the CodeCommit. So if we reload this, we have our Laravel project over here. Great. One thing that you might notice is that a couple of folders and files are missing. And the reason for this is that we have a git ignore file, and this tells Git automatically which files and which kind of folders to ignore. So for example, our node modules folder is missing, our vendor folder is missing, our end file is missing, and so on. So we have a couple of things that are simply missing on our Laravel project in our CodeCommit. And the reason for this is, for example, the vendor directory can be recreated using Composer, or the node modules folder can be recreated using npm install, or the end file might contain any credentials, any sensitive information which we don't want to check into our repository. And this is fine for now. I want to touch on this a little bit later when we are talking about building images on our code build. All right, off to the next lecture where we are going to set up our ECR repositories. So in this lecture, we are going to set up ECR repositories in order for our images to be working from our private repository and then push them onto an ECR cluster. So we're going to the Elastic Container Service, and then we are going to ECR repositories. And here we are creating a repository. The one is we call Laravel app, and the other one we are calling Nginx. Great, create the repository. And now we have to get our app and our Nginx into these repositories. Well, go into the repository, view the push commands. We're going to log in, copy this one, paste it here. Let me clear this, and then we are going to, it's already built. And then the next thing is we have to tag it the right way. So there is no Laravel app latest. It is called tomw1808/ and it's from here Laravel project, Laravel project, and then we are going to upload this. So it's uploading the layers right now, and once this is done, we are doing the same with our Nginx image that we have in our local repository for Docker Desktop, and we are publishing it to our ECR repository for Nginx. All right, our image is pushed. Let's have a look if it is really here in the repository, Laravel app. We have the latest image here, and then Nginx. We are going to view the push commands again. We have to log in first into the repository here. Login succeeded, and then we have to tag it the right way. And then we have to upload this image. It's much smaller. Great, this is done. Let's have a look if this is really here. Awesome. All right. In the next lecture, we are going to set up our ECS cluster with an RDS database and Elasticache and let our Laravel run.